Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of RC Classic Garage. Today's episode, we're back on the Alfa Romeo 1750 GTV barn find, and we finally start welding down the right hand side of the car. Now this Alfa was driven into a barn in 1986 and it sat untouched for almost 40 years until I decided to rescue it. So in the last few episodes, we stripped the car, taken away loads of underseal and started cutting away the rust on the rear and right hand side of the car. Now when we cut away the outer sill, I was very happy to see we had really good inner and middle sills on the car, but not so much on the front wing where there were some dodgy old repairs. Basically a plate put on the inside filled with lead on the outside, and well, that's led to a bit of extra work. So in today's episode, let's get stuck into welding the right hand side floorboards, the A pillar, the B post, and start fitting the sill. But before we can do that, we need to fit the door properly. And I've got a feeling that that door's gonna need a lot of surgery. We're starting with the rear floor pans, and thankfully, the originals are in pretty good shape. The factory underseal really did a job. They're solid, but a few crusty patches and surface rust that needs sorting. So first step is to clean everything up so we can properly assess the area. Then we'll mark out and cut a new patch panel to weld into place. Now we could replace the entire floor pan, but honestly most of it is still in great condition, and the aftermarket replacements just don't match the original contours that well. So instead we're going to cut only the bad sections and patch in new steel. This way we'll preserve as much originality as possible and keep the shape looking right. Now the new panel still needs a bit of tweaking, some light panel beating and a bit of twisting, but it's a lot easier than fabricating a new piece from scratch. Now once we've got the new panel shaped, we mark out where to cut on the floor and remove the old metal, grinding and prepping the edges. We then coat everything in weld-through primer before welding it in. And finally, we grind the weld smooth. And honestly, it's come out really clean. It blends in nicely and keeps that original feel intact. Next up, we move on to the front floor pan. This one only needs a much smaller patch, but it's the same process all over again. We start by cutting the new panel to size, then mark the old floor and carefully cut out the section we're replacing. A bit of panel beating to get the shape just right, test fit, tweak it a little more, and then it's time to weld it in. And then once the welding's done, we grind back the seams, smooth everything off, and give it a final cleanup. Now the jacking point sits between the floor pan we've just repaired and the inner sill, so the next step is getting it into place. So we need to test fit the outer sill so the jacking point sits in the right position, just like it did in the factory. Once we're happy with the placement, we knock it into position and weld both the inner sill and the repaired floor pan, locking everything together structurally. And now we move on to the A-post, starting with the small repair at the front of the A-pillar where there is a little patch of rusty metal. We cut a fresh piece of steel to match the area, bend and shape it to fit, then mark out the patch on the car. Once we've got the shape right, cut out the old metal, clean and grind the edges and prep for welding. And just take a moment to appreciate that inner sill. Not even a hint of rust on the edges. We got seriously lucky with these sills. With a final test fit and everything cleaned up, we hit the patch with weld-through primer, weld it in place, and then grind it smooth for a clean finish. Another solid little repair ticked off the list. Next, we move further down the A pillar where it needs a patch along the bottom edge. Now same process here. We cut out the rusted section, shape a fresh piece of steel, hit it with weld-through primer, weld it in place, nice and solid. Then we tackle the angled section of the A-pillar. Again, we cut a fresh panel, test fit it carefully to follow the original lines, weld it in, grind it smooth, and clean up the area. Finally, we spray the whole repaired section in primer to seal it up and protect everything from flash rusting. It's all looking strong, neat, and ready for the next stage. Before we move across to the B-pillar, there's one last detail to finish up at the front. We need to weld a final lip to complete the repair section. So we shape the lip, get it welded into place, clean it up, and hit it with primer. Simple, but it finishes the area off properly. With the A-pillar finish, we move to the B-pillar, and it's a similar story here. There's a patch needed at the bottom, plus a small repair at the back. Nothing too complicated. Just cut out the rust, shape some fresh metal, weld it in, and clean it up. Straightforward stuff, and it all adds it to being solid, rust-free foundation. Now with both the A-pillar and B-pillar repairs complete, we give the whole area a coat of rust-preventative primer, followed by a layer of matte black, just like it left the factory. Not only does it look tidy, but it also gives us a solid protection and proper OEM finish. Now, before we can do any more welding, the outer sill has to go on, because everything else, forward and backward, aligns to it. The wing, the door gaps, it all depends on the sill being in the right place. And to get that right, we need to fit the door properly first. That means installing new hinges, fitting the rubbers, the seals, the rails, the lot. The door has to close properly and everything in place before we can lock anything in. Now this is a tedious process with the door on, off, back on again, and endless little adjustments to get the fit just right. And this is all before we even get to changing the door skin. But if you want the panel gaps to look right in the end, this is a bit you just can't rush. Now with everything lined up and looking pretty good, it's finally time to take the door off and give it a brand new skin and tackle any repairs underneath. Now removing the door skin sounds simple, but it's a job that takes patience, precision, and a bit of grinding madness. To get started, you've got to carefully grind away all the edges around the door. You're not just shaving metal, you're slicing open decades of factory assembly, millimeter by millimeter. You've also got to hunt down all the spot welds along the top edge, because these little guys are holding the skin tight to the door frame. One by one, you've got to get them, either grinder or chisel, sometimes both. And the whole process will grind, chisel, pry, repeat, until you finally separate the outer skin from the inner frame. When it starts to give, it feels like you've cracked a code. It's not the quickest job, but definitely one of the most rewarding. And with the door skin off, we finally get a look at the frame, and well, surprise, there's a lot more work than we expected. First up, the mystery of the window that never closed properly. Well, the mechanism looked fine, but here's the culprit, a rusted off roller. With that gone, the window would never have enough tension to wind up. Mystery solved. And then there's rust along the bottom edge, and even some old school brass repairs hiding in there. The bottom section of this frame, well, it's going to need a whole new replacement panel. And here at the top hinge, same story, an old brass repair. So let's get cutting and welding. Now for the hinge area, we start by cutting out the damage. Then fabricating a new clean patch from a fresh sheet of metal. Weld it in, grind it back, some primer, neat and tidy. And well, for the roller bracket, it's more involved. We cut out the entire rusted section, fabricate a brand new bracket from scratch, weld it in place. Well, it's all solid and functional. Finally, everything gets a healthy coat of rust preventative primer. And at this stage, Before moving on to welding the lower section of the frame, I decided to apply some paint stripper, power wash, then degreaser and power wash again. Now the next job is to weld in a new bottom to the frame. But before we can do that, there are a few important jobs to do. I start by coating all the fresh welded areas with grey rust-proof primer. And I treat the inside of the frame with rust converter, followed by rust protection spray. These hidden areas are where rust loves to return, so this step I take seriously. If it's done right, I won't need to touch it for another 50 years. With the weld sealed and inside protected, I spray the entire door frame in grey primer, ready to take colour. Then it's onto the first coat of yellow ochre. And finally, the door starts to look part of the car again. But before I move to the lower frame repair, I install the window winder cartridge. Well, why now? Because it's a nightmare to fit when the outer skin is back on. This cable system inside is, let's just say, a bit of Italian engineering flair. But after some fiddling, adjustment, and a bit of patience, it's back in and working. And now we have a functioning window winder. Always satisfying to see something mechanical come back to life. So now that everything's clean, protected, painted, and working, we move on to the next big job, cutting out and replacing the bottom section of the door frame. Now we start by test fitting the bottom section of this door frame, and this bit is all about alignment. Now there's a lot of old brazing brass repairs and rust that needs to be ground back. It's messy work, but necessary to get a clean, solid fit. Now after plenty of fettling, tweaking and adjusting, it finally lines up nicely. Now we can mark it out accurately for cutting. But as the old saying goes, measure twice, cut once. In fact, measure 3 times. Especially when you're dealing with old classic panels. There's no room for error here. Now, with everything marked, we take the plunge and cut off the bottom section of the frame. Care is key here, especially around the hinge support and reinforcement beams. The last thing you want is to compromise the structural integrity of the door. Again, just look at the truly nasty repairs in the hinge section. It's a relief we're cutting all of this out and doing it properly. With the bottom section removed, we clean everything up thoroughly so that we can test fit the new panel. And a few adjustments later, we're ready to tack it into place. Just a few light tacks for now so that we can fine tune before committing to full welds. Now the panel fit wasn't bad overall, but we did run into a small issue down here in the bottom corner. There was a slight overhang, just a few millimeters, but enough to throw off the alignment. So rather than forcing it, we took the panel off, trimmed it to size to do it properly. Now this kind of thing is typical with replacement panels. They often need a bit of persuasion to match the original shape. After trimming it down and test fitting it again, and this time everything lined up just the way it should. So with the fitment spot on, we move to welding it in properly. Nice controlled welds, minimize distortion and ensure a strong, clean finish. And just like that, the new bottom section is finally in place, fitted, welded and cleaned up. And you guessed it, some rust protective primer. Now it's ready to take the door skin. Now before we can fit the outer door skin, there's a bit of important prep work to do on the inside. I start by giving the inner face a proper cleanup and scuff up with Scotch pad. This helps the paint stick and get rid of light surface contamination. Next, it gets a coat of grey primer to seal everything in. Then I lay down the first gripper coat of yellow ochre, followed by a second and third coat for proper coverage. And finally, it's finished off with as close match as possible to the original factory sound deadener. Now we lay the frame carefully into the door skin, clamp it down and check it for a perfect fit all the way around. This is the last chance to make sure everything lines up, so we double check the edges and gaps and all of the curves. Then comes the workout, folding the edges over the frame. Not exactly a gym membership, but your arms feel it and every bit of it by the end. This has to be done all the way around the door, slowly and evenly, to get a proper, secure fit without any distortion. Once we're happy that everything is solid and secure, we clean up the metal, back and front, and then the hinges go back on. And once again, the door is fitted, and the alignment is looking pretty good. We're working on getting these perfect door gaps and clean straight lines across the car. As I said, this door is pivotal to the next stages, getting the sill positioning correct, and then aligning the new wing to match the door. But for now, I'm very happy with how it is sitting, solid, square, and ready to guide the rest of the panel work. Right guys, we're calling that an episode, and I'm really happy with the way this door is fitting. Lines are straight, door is solid, and everything is lining up. So that does mean we can finally start welding in this outer sill, which is a big milestone for this car. Because then we can go on to welding on these back panels and the back valance and move on to the front. So guys, please join me in the next episode as we push ahead with this restoration journey. If you're enjoying this build series, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks all for watching and see you all next time.